Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, I want to tell you right now, my most distinguished guest tonight is Susan Katz Keating. She is an acclaimed military and intelligence expert who we have had on before. But I want to remind everyone of a few salient things. Now, she is also a journalist. She's a writer and an author of at least 223 books. She produces an average of about one book every 8 hours. So the other thing that's interesting, I find, is that when she's not writing, she also fills in as an actual accredited emergency room doctor at Walter Reed Hospital. She's been known to teach advanced thermodynamics in applied nuclear physics and quantum mechanics, and she has an emphasis on Schrodinger's cat at MIT in Cambridge. In her spare time, however, this is also very interesting, Susan Katz Keating, she keeps up her aviation hours as a master pilot in the Lockheed Martin C-5M Super Galaxy. She flies for the United States Air Force out of Westover Air Force Base in Massachusetts, and she's also certified to teach the instructor pilot course, or the IPC, for the Boeing Sikorsky RAH-66 Comanche attack helicopter, as well as the Sikorsky HH-60 Pave Hawk, which that bespeaks a lot to her. Now, when she's not doing this, she's working in concert with the Cray Corporation via the Cray XC50 accelerated liquid-cooled GPU supercomputer, which develops a peak performance of, these days I think it's about 500 petaflops, in order to assist in the design of gas bubble cavitation effects to encompass an object traveling through liquids, with the end goal being supersonic, supercavitating submarines. Now, and someday she'll learn how to have actual credentials, and maybe she'll actually accomplish something in her life. But in truth, now, Susan Katz Keating, she's an investigative journalist and a popular blogger. Well, she doesn't do so much blogging now, but she specializes in national security. She is a former, dig this, folks, she is a former Washington Times reporter. She's the author of Prisoners of Hope, Exploiting the POW-MIA Myth in America from Random House, and a whole bunch of books for younger readers. So as a People magazine correspondent, she covers all sorts of stories. She covered Virginia Tech, the Fort Hood shootings, the SEAL assault on Osama bin Laden, and this is also very, very astounding. Her work has appeared in Reader's Digest, the New York Times, Air and Space Smithsonian, the American Legion, VFW, Soldier of Fortune, and by God, we're going to get to that, and a whole bunch of other publications. She's been cited in the New Yorker, the Wall Street Journal, Saloon, and a bunch of other journals. She is a founding trustee for the National Museum of Americans in Wartime. She serves on the board for Cooking with the Troops. She briefly was in the U.S. Women's Army Corps, where she earned her expert rating on the M16 rifle. She was editor of the Dixon Tribune newspaper in California, director of the Travis Air Force Base Museum, and this is another cool part, which I sure as shit would love to have done myself. She served as a restoration crew chief on a B-52. She belongs to this is, again, way cool. She belongs to the Association of Former Intelligence Officers, or AFIO. And like I said before, someday Susan Katz Keating will actually accomplish something in her life. So with all that having been said, I say welcome, Susan Katz Keating, to the Bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon radio show. Welcome aboard.
Oh my God, BZ, I just had to take my phone off mute. I was laughing so hard listening to this. I love all that stuff that I did. That's really, wow.
If
the Apache pilot stuff was great.
You should be proud of yourself for having done all that stuff. I haven't done just a wee little winkly fraction of that.
Well, this is absolutely wonderful, and I'm entering your introduction into the, award competition for Best Intro of the Year. But hi, thank you for having me on. It's great to be.
It's been grand. Now, the sad thing is, and this is my pouty face, the sad thing is that I haven't had you on for a while, and the real truth is you live way over on the East Coast, and I'm way, way, way over here on the left coast. And the time discrepancy is not conducive to a lot of live stuff. And so when I have the opportunity to actually talk to you, it is an absolute treat and a pleasure. Now, that having been said, you just recently told me that you're sort of an itinerant nomad. So what are some of the things that you're doing today? I mean, you still write. You write like crazy. I know that. You had a blog. I think you took your blog down. You don't have your blog up. But if people want to read you or find out where you may be in social media, where would they go to find out stuff about you or read some of the stuff that you write?
Well, you know where I sort of curate a lot of this stuff is on my LinkedIn. So I'm not sure what the actual link is, but if you just search me on LinkedIn, Susan Katz Keating, you can add me and I'll accept you. Or I have a Facebook writer fan page.
Okay.
And I've got my Twitter feed.
Okay.
So each time I write something for, I think my last piece was for Soldier of Fortune, and then I do a lot of stuff for People Magazine and for Real Clear Investigations. So all that stuff goes up there.
Okay. Let's start there. Let's start at the start. Okay. So not long ago, I don't know, maybe a day or two or three or something like that, I saw you on Twitter, and you said, or maybe it was even Facebook, I don't remember which media, but you said something similar to, I'm out with Robert Brown. And I think I sent you a reply or a question. Is that the Robert K. Brown of Soldier of Fortune? And yes, it was. So what the heck was going on with you and Robert Brown, the publisher of Soldier of Fortune?
Nothing good. He is my longtime partner in crime, and he is one of my very, very, very first editor/publishers. I have been with him for, well, I've lost my birth certificate, so I forget exactly when I started, but I was a kid pretty much when I started with Soldier of Fortune, way, 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 way back in the way back. So I've been writing for him, on and off for, since I was a child.
Okay. Well, that would, if I'm tickling my brain appropriately here, I used to subscribe to SOF, and I think that was in the 80s. And I couldn't even tell you right now, is Soldier of Fortune still published?
They do, but they publish online. I think, they're moving forward with the times, and everybody else is going online. So what the heck? SOF is doing it too. And they've got a really good online presence.
Okay. Because I used to read their stories of fun and adventure, and they go all around the world. And now I have to say, that's you now. You are the itinerant nomad. You do go all around the world. I don't think there's probably a continent that you haven't visited, would be my guess. So what are some of the projects that you've got going on these days?
Well, a very mundane project is I'm writing a memoir of my beginnings with Soldier of Fortune, is how it all started, because things were so different back then, just for journalists in general, and just, how we went and did. So I'm working on a memoir on my Soldier of Fortune beginnings and the very early days.
And you, because of, we joked about this before the show, and I said, I bet you have a big damn go bag so that if somebody goes, SKK, can you go fill in the blank? And you say yes, and you grab your go bag and boom, you're out the door. So that's your life now, isn't it?
I'm looking at my go bag right now. It's actually a really nice go bag. And can I get in a word from my sponsor? Because it was donated to me for a purpose. It's military luggage. Gave me a couple of go bags to try out. So I'm trying out my favorite one right now, which is, it has lots of pockets, which for me is really cool. So yeah, I've got my go bag, and I keep a separate bag for my laptop for some reason. It's probably not efficient, but yeah. So I keep my wardrobe down to some really nice hiking pants. Those are the stretchy hiking pants, mm-hmm. right? That kind of cargo pants. And then a revolving wardrobe of tank tops and T-shirts and a few jackets. And everything is either, like black or tan or muted color, right? Because that doesn't show the dirt, and you could match it with everything and have a vest with a bunch of pockets in it. And if I get the call, yeah, okay, yes, I can go. I'm off.
How cool would that be? You're leading the life right now that people in their teens and maybe early 20s would love to lead, because you literally are going all over the place. Now, I noted that there aren't any Arctic parkas in there, but anyway, there aren't people blowing up Antarctica or the Arctic right now.
Yeah, I figure I kind of had better do it while I can. I do not want to wind up, in the rocking chair with my cats or whatever, I have to keep saying, I wish I'd done that hobo thing years ago when I had the chance. So I thought, it does have its challenges. I will say it's not for everyone because, you don't always have the best food on handy. So I have to keep a little supply of my sustenance with me, right? And mail is a bit of an issue, but for the most part, it's phenomenal. I highly recommend it.
Oh, yeah. How liberating would that be? Well, we talked about projects. What are some of the projects that you might be working on right now?
Well, the big one is the Soldier of Fortune memoir. That's my main one right now, and I'm having a whole lot of fun with that. So I'm getting into, like people have asked me, how did you get started with Soldier of Fortune anyway?
Yeah, because that doesn't seem to lend itself to. I know you cover the military, and I know you cover intelligence matters. But getting into Soldier of Fortune, it would seem like that would have been a rather sort of closed clique from the very beginning. So how did you kind of find Robert K. Brown? And because I noticed that he had a cadre of people that consistently wrote for him over the years. And how did you kind of get into that group?
Well, it was actually kind of funny. Do your listeners know that you and I have known each other for a long time?
I don't know, but they do now.
Okay, so we've known each other. We were in college together.
Yes, we were. Okay. Miscreants.
We had a radio station together, and we did a little publication. But do you remember, by chance, that little apartment that I had in Davis?
Yes, I do, as a matter of fact, yes.
Okay, so here's what I did. I wanted to write about mercenaries. I thought, this is a cool story. I wanted to break into journalism in a splashy way, and I was like, what's a good feature I could do? So I thought, I want to write about mercenaries. So what I did was I put an ad in Soldier of Fortune, and it said, "Are you a mercenary?" And I put my address of that apartment in my ad.
Oh shit!
Yeah, 801 J Street apartment, whatever it was. So I put my address in, and it said, "Are you a mercenary?" So I got boom, boom, boom. Several things happened, one of which was a visit from some employees of the federal government.
That was my next question, whether they saw that and went, I wonder what she means by this.
Well, yes, they did. And I also got a whole lot of letters from people thinking that I was hiring a mercenary. So I got all these responses. In fact, buckets of responses from would-be mercenaries, and I just put S. Katz, so that they thought I was some guy who was hiring, and
right.
The feds thought that I'm violating what was the Hatch Act or whatever. So I got all these responses, and I thought, I'll see if Soldier of Fortune wants a story on this. So I wrote to Soldier of Fortune, and I said, hey, do you want a story on me soliciting mercenaries? And Bob Brown got back to me, and he said, that's really a stupid idea for a story. It sounds boring, but if you come up with anything, let me know. And then that kind of sat. And then when I got the job at the Washington Times, I was smuggling a painting back into the Pentagon, which is another side story. And I was in the lobby waiting for a friend of mine to drive me up this smuggled painting, and lo and behold, who's in the lobby but Robert Brown? And I asked him, hey, you're Bob Brown. Do you remember me? I wrote to you. And he goes, no. And I said, do you need a lift? So he needed a lift into Georgetown, and we stuffed him in the back of this Porsche. So you know how they had the hatchbacks?
Right.
So, like, my friend was test driving these cars. He wrote about them. So we stopped Bob Brown in the back, and, like, he was crammed up, right, folded into this hatchback thing, and his head was inches from mine, and I thought, this is my chance. I said, you know...
It's a captive audience.
Right. And I said, you ever have, hold on, this announcement from the local Air Force base is coming through. I'll move somewhere more quiet. Anyway, so he said, you remind me of my ex-wife, which I took to be a compliment, and I found out later that she'd been in a motorcycle wreck and she was this hellion. Anyway, so long story short, we dropped him off in Georgetown. I picked up the painting, smuggled it into the Pentagon, and then that night went to a Soldier of Fortune party with all of these rebels and Mosquito Indians hanging out, and I just went from there.
Well, if that isn't a story, I don't know what the hell is. And I remember the story about the smuggled painting, which is why, you know, let's be honest, for fuck's sake, the book that you're going to write about Soldier of Fortune is one that I would certainly pick up. And when you publish it, you got to let me know where that is so that I can get myself a copy, because that's an incredible story in the first place. Well, you're a journalist. You've been writing for a long time. You got your start. You kind of got your chops going in Dixon for a real small newspaper there. And you said you went over to the Washington Times. What, in sort of general, because of all the things about fake news and blah, 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 do you have any sort of generic thoughts about, hey, what is the state of the art in journalism, at least in the United States today?
Well, I do have some thoughts on that. It's evolved, I think, quite a bit from my very early days. And, you know, like when you and I were doing campus journalism,
right,
we had a particular mindset, which was, you know, we could not be biased and we couldn't have affiliations. And I remember when I was at the Dixon Tribune, you know, my first editor, like before I became the editor, said, I just want you to know you can't register for a political party, you can't join any clubs, you can't vote, you can't be affiliated with anything. You have to be a neutral person, and you have to keep yourself apart from what you're reporting on so that you won't be biased. And I took that to heart, this whole notion of you really do have to be an unbiased chronicler of human events. And then over the years, you know, I've seen that attitude drift away among my fellow journalists, and there are still a lot of us. I think most journalists now will register to vote, or they will join, you know, a club somewhere. But what I've noticed is that a lot of journalists in the big legacy media outlets, especially, they don't really try too hard to hide their bias. So that to me is a big change, and I've seen that evolve over the years. And if you're at a cocktail party or, you know, gathering with your friends down at IHOP or whatever you do to socialize, you can have opinions, and that's what we're all about in this country is, you know, freedom of thought and,
right,
and association. But if you are expressing those opinions in your news reporting, and if you allow them to color your reporting, then I think you need to back away from that and not cover that subject.
What an absolutely astounding, refreshing, insightful, and I hate to say it now, but you correct me if it's wrong, that's old school journalism. And I'm not trying to say anything about the age of you and me, because we're not in our 20s anymore. But it's a hell of a comment about the state of journalism today, that to do this, to be this this honest with as much clarity, it really sets you as an individual journalist apart from the bunch of other people and the other journalists themselves. Now, since we're kind of on the topic of journalism and what passes for journalism today, What do you think about the public attitude about Trump, say, for example, President Trump, as expressed in the media?
Well, I think that, again, everybody's entitled to their opinion. And you and I both are, yay, we're all about individuality and you can have your views. But if the media, if people clearly dislike Trump, for whatever reasons, they should not be covering him. And I'll give you an example of something that actually did happen. When Trump was sworn in,
okay.
I covered that inaugural for People magazine. I was their front person for the inaugural, which meant that I got to go inside with the media room, and I was with all the big media people covering Trump. And it got really cold, so we went inside and we watched portions of it. And the swearing in we saw outside, but afterwards we went inside in the small room and watched portions of it. And some of my colleagues were, I thought, very professional, and they were very, neutral, sticking to the facts, just covering the story in a straightforward way. Some of them were openly dismissive and mocking and disdainful toward Trump, which, again, if I heard that at a party, I'd say, okay, you have your opinion. But because they were covering the story, I felt that they should have recused themselves from the story. And yet there was, there was no sense that they should. No one else. I wasn't going to say anything because I didn't want to get into that kind of a discussion among my colleagues at that time. But no one else said, "Hey, you're not being neutral here. You're not being a fair observer." And again, I totally understand people liking or disliking a particular candidate
Sure.
for whatever their.
Sure.
But when that prompts you to go overboard, like some of the criticisms I've seen of Trump in the media, you have to boil down to, okay, what exactly is he doing that they don't like? Like, what specifically don't they like about him? And I think a lot of what, there are some policies they don't like, but what they don't like specifically is they just don't like him.
Yes.
And I think, and he's an outsider. And I think part of the disdain is, here's somebody who's completely outside the whole political norm, and he's outside the system, and he's come in and he's really turned things over. It was phenomenal that he actually prevailed and that he won this election. So I think part of that is the sense of, we don't like this outsider coming in and messing with our system. But also part of it is that they just don't like him. It's a personality thing.
Well, I would submit that it's a great deal to do with style and, yes, being an outsider. Now, a lot of people that are, it's a very inclusive, sort of inculcated, funny little incestuous thing that DC has and the media have. And it's very regional, like the Northeast people. You have to know all the right people, like you say, all the right cocktail parties, etc. And the funny thing is, he's still considered an outsider, though he's a New York kind of guy, which it couldn't be more Northeast than that. And in the past, he's gotten involved in some politics. When he's laid money down, he's laid money pretty much on both sides. He's laid money on the kind of the GOP side, and he's laid money down for the Democrats as well, fairly equally, as far as I know. But yeah, I completely agree with that assessment. And having said that, though, the sad thing about journalism is that if you don't have a bias against Trump, some other journalists may tend to look down upon those who are trying to be as fair as possible. It's almost as though fair has gone out the door. And that leads me to my next question. The Bill of Rights, and more specifically with regard to journalists, which is where you come in, the First Amendment. I don't think I have ever seen the First Amendment come under fire so negatively and so scurrilously as it is being these days on way altogether too many levels. Do you I got to ask the question, the fundamental question. Do you kind of fear for the First Amendment?
Oh, boy, that is a super loaded question. Wow. A little bit. Yeah, a little bit.
I do. I have to be honest, especially on college campuses.
Well, and that's actually, I think, a real hotbed of it.
Oh, that's a massive hotbed.
Yeah. I have this very deep-rooted love of America, and I believe in this country.
Do. Yeah.
Like, I believe in this country. And I think maybe a part of me is saying, oh, this is America. This couldn't happen. These are anomalies. But on the other hand, I have to be very realistic and say, there's some thought control, or there's some thought policing going on that's really ugly. It's scary. A part of me wants to say, okay, it's going to be fine. The Constitution will prevail, the American people will prevail, but I also see things like a kid's hat getting ripped off because someone doesn't like his hat. If that's he's not a journalist, but he's allowed to wear a hat that he wants to. There was nothing wrong with that. It's protected speech. But more and more, I think people are feeling somehow impelled to say, okay, we're going to take control. You can't do that because morals are so imperative right now that we can act. And
I find it a very sad state of affairs, and I have to be honest, I do fear for the First Amendment because all it would take is the proper combination, in my opinion, all it would take is the proper combination of jurists and situation for someone to make some kind of a what I would consider to be an arbitrary decision. And the First Amendment, I unfortunately feel, could find itself in some serious jeopardy. It's already in serious jeopardy on college campuses, which is where you and I grew up in a time on college where free speech was the thing. We had the ability to utilize free speech. If we wanted to get out and protest, we could do that. If we wanted to get 4 orange cars together and a band and point out how some of the political stuff that was going on campus was really stupid, we could do that as well. We had the ability to speak our mind, and at no time, I'm sure, not for me, or I'm guessing for you as well, at no time did I ever think about, my speech is okay. The speech of that person over there, that's just wrong. And additionally, I'm going to do my very level best to make sure that I quash whatever it is that he or she is saying over there. I've never seen a time like this before. I've never seen a time like this.
I never had that fear when you and I were in college.
No.
It never crossed my mind. And you and I did something. So we did some pretty silly and goofy stuff. We had this radio show. We had, what was the Intellect Jewel, which was a friggin' scream.
Yeah, it was. I still have copies.
No way.
I do.
Serious?
Oh, yeah.
No.
I've got probably 8 or 9 copies.
Oh, those are collector's items. Don't lose those.
I know. They're worth, last I had them appraised, they were worth about $28,000.
I don't have one copy. I don't have a single copy. And
okay.
Do your listeners know about the Intellect Jewels? Do they know what it was?
No.
We did. Okay, all right, listeners, think of the Onion, only funnier, edgier. We were the original college kid Onion.
That's pretty much it. That's a pretty damn good summary about that.
And the name was brilliant.
I love that too.
God, it was brilliant.
You know, it actually took me. There was another dude that was involved in that, and I'm going to say his name. He's not going to be listening, but it was Richard K. Carson, who started that.
I was going to ask you about him. Where is he now?
My last check is that he's somewhere up in the Pacific Northwest, Washington, or some of the islands around Washington. is my last thought. That's the last. He had a blog, not necessarily a blog or a website, and now when I get on the internet, I don't even see him up there anymore. So I really don't know. But at last check, he was way up in the Pacific Northwest.
Was he still writing?
I don't see anything. Okay. And if there was one guy, would you agree with me? And folks that are listening live or folks that are listening in podcast, I'm sure you know someone in the process of either growing up in high school or in college, or maybe he or she was the person that you worked next to on a job. But do you know the guy or the gal who is so damn intelligent they use multisyllabic words all the time? Maybe you've seen examples of their writing, or you know that their wit is just like boom, 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 boom. They're on it all the time. This is that guy. Richard Carson was that guy, and it was fun as fuck to work with him.
And he was so unassuming. He was very misleading because he's also, the other part of him is, you look at this guy and you keep on looking. He was the guy nobody noticed. He was the quiet kid sitting in the corner.
Yep.
Who everybody just ignored because he was so quiet, kept to himself, blinking. He would sit there blinking, and then every now and then he'd pop off with some phenomenally hilarious comment, and you realized, while we're ignoring him, he's paying really close attention to everybody else.
His brain was burbling 24/7. That's
it. Really,
it was on. It was never off. Okay, we got about, I think we got about 10 minutes left or so. So let me see if I can get to some other topics. You write about the military, and you also write about intelligence issues. So in a big sort of umbrella fashion, and I don't even necessarily want to take it back to like one administration, the previous administration versus the current administration, but I know for a time the various branches of the military were in some very serious dark straits. So in overall, would you say the state of the art in the U.S. military, can we look forward? Can we what do you see possibly for its current status and or its future?
I see it as a very robust, thriving organization, and I've been on the ground with these people at different levels, from, the Pentagon down to, the guy who takes care of the engine room on an aircraft carrier at sea. Mm-hmm. This is a cohesive group. These are fantastic people. A lot of them, but they're kids, but they're young people, and they're dedicated, they're honest. Like, we've got an incredible manpower, woman power, whatever you want. We've just got a great force. My one concern that has been a concern of mine for a long time is the proper use of our troops and the military.
There you go.
My bugaboo is the rules of engagement, and I think we see people coming back from war and their lives are forever changed. And the obvious ones are people missing limbs, but also people who've been through some shit. And my greatest concern is rules of engagement. If we're going to use our troops, use them effectively and with purpose. Don't just hamstring them. Don't tie their hands behind their backs and say, okay, well, we're going to send you to war. And by the way, if the enemy fires on you, you can't fire back unless you can determine X, Y, and Z. And the rules of engagement change. Like in Vietnam, there were maddening rules of engagement for air combat and ground combat as well. Yep. So my big wish for the military is, we are the best trained, best equipped force in the world. Let's use them properly. Don't hamstring them. Use them effectively, incisively, or don't do it.
Would you, Susan Katz Keating, SKK, would you say that could be distilled down to the classic military statement? And that's this: And I wish more presidents and other people in positions of power would adhere to this. The military exists for two things: to break shit and kill people. And if you're not willing to break shit and kill people, they shouldn't be applied. It's as simple as that, in my humble opinion. The military should not be the progressive petri dish, and it should not be distilled down to some kind of a social experiment. You do that every other place except your military powers. Tell me, please, where I'm wrong on that.
I'm looking and I don't see where you're wrong. It's really not a place for that. It really isn't. It's a place for national defense. That's what it's all about. The most effective use of national defense. And I don't really think that we need to focus on individual small needs of various people who want to be promoted or, do well in their careers. What we should care about is the defense of the nation. That's the only thing that matters. That's the only thing that matters.
This just popped into my brain. And if you could talk about this for maybe a minute and a half or 2 minutes, that'd be great. I can remember that you did either a series of articles or a series of blog pieces in I think it was the early or mid 2000s, and it happened to be about a U.S. Navy captain, and it was regarding a massive abuse of power. That instance just happened to be a female captain, but it could easily apply to any captain as well. And she had a fiefdom, and eventually enough people, she pissed off enough people that her kingdom was taken down. And if that's where I first understood what you were saying and how supportive you were of the U.S. military, because the military is bigger than just one person like her. So essentially, can you go over the sort of an overarching circumstance of what she did and what happened to her?
Well, her name was Holly Graf, and her initials are HAG, Holly Ann Graf, and they called her the Sea Hag, which I thought, was an expression of what her sailors thought of her. She was a captain aboard a ship, and she ran it They described her as a tyrant. She was described by her sailors as an abusive personality, and people wrote to me documenting the types of things she did, throwing coffee cups at people and, walking around in pink fuzzy slippers. And she abused her authority. And the way it came across was that for her, it was all about the power. It wasn't so much about, the sailors or the Navy or the ship. It was about her. So thank goodness the Navy paid attention, because a lot of the sailors complained over and over and over again. They gave specifics, and the Navy finally, it takes a while to get these things rolling, but they launched an investigation and they relieved her of duty. So she then went before a captain's mast, and she had a very good defender, and she did not lose her retirement, but she didn't get another command. And I believe she's out of the Navy, and I think she's in the civilian world now, but don't hold me to that. But she was never sent. She didn't go back out to sea. So she was not allowed to go back into that kind of position where she could abuse authority again. But it was egregious and it was extreme. I mean, some of it was actually, like, if you read these stories, you couldn't help but laugh. Like, you really couldn't help but laugh. But if you and I, or, listeners, if you're on that ship under those circumstances, we wouldn't be laughing. We would be calling our congressman or our, mom and dad saying, get me out of here, anything.
She was sort of the female equivalent of Captain Queeg, in a way.
That's what they compared her to Captain Queeg.
Yeah, I'm not shocked at all. President Trump is in Europe. right now, and there's become an issue of Europe basically paying its fair share. In NATO, European NATO members are expected to pay, I think it's either 2%, 2.5%, or whatever it is. It's close to 2% of your annual GDP to NATO. And the European nations have not been paying this for years and years and years. So in general, do you think that NATO will change as a result of President Trump bringing some of these errors or miscalculations to their attention? Will NATO continue to remain strong? Or maybe even this general question, do we still need NATO?
That question has been brought up quite a bit. And when Ash Carter was SecDef, I was with him, and Dunford was there when a reporter asked that same question, do we need NATO? And they came back, very strongly and said we do. But I think NATO will bristle at being asked to contribute more. However, to me, it's kind of the analogy of, the 25-year-old who's living in mom's basement who's suddenly told, by the way, you have to mow the lawn.
Yeah,
right?
Get out and get a job, damn it.
Right. And the kid says, what? And then figures out, actually, they're right. And I've spent time talking to NATO military partners, and they're really, really good at what they do. They're dedicated. They're united. They support us. We support them. However, we're not the money bags here, or we shouldn't be.
No.
What's our responsibility to keep them afloat? I think we should still work together with the NATO countries, and we should have NATO, but I don't think it's our responsibility to sustain NATO.
I couldn't agree more. We're getting close to go time, and there were so many other issues that I wanted to talk about. And maybe I'll distill some of the other questions that I had. For example, we were going to talk about Iran. I wanted to talk about that. So maybe I can bump it up a few levels and say this. The final question would be, what security issue keeps you up at night?
Oh, boy. There are actually a couple that keep me up at night. One of them is terrorists, or I don't even like to call them terrorists because they're enemy actors. Okay.
Okay.
So there are a lot of enemy actors slipping in to Europe, and I believe into this country also under the guise of being political refugees. So that troubles me very much, especially in Europe, because I think they've gone in very deeply, and I don't know how deeply they've come in here. So I don't know where the various cells are. That concerns me very much, because I think that our first responder responses could quickly be overwhelmed given the right set of circumstance. So that keeps me up. And the other thing is the power grid, because the power companies will tell you that they intercept attempts on the power grid on a regular basis. It's someone, you can imagine anyone, pick an enemy, is trying to attack the power grid, and then you have to ask that question. If they are successful in attacking the power grid, how much food do you have that's not in a refrigerator? How much water do you have access to that's not dependent on a pump? How quickly would our social structure fall apart with a prolonged lack of electricity? So that worries me very much.
I would have to completely concur. And much of what you're talking about is by way of either, I'm guessing, you're talking about internal hacking, perhaps even a physical plant attack itself, or there's the issue of the EMP, the electromagnetic pulse, which if you were to detonate, say, some kind of a nuclear device in the air or locally, the EMP from the resulting explosion tends to fry a lot of electronic equipment. And in many cases, you're not going to get any of that stuff back, especially if you're talking about electric power plant transformers, etc., which are extremely expensive, take a year or more to build, and the bulk of them are built in Germany, not in the United States. Lovely.
Yeah. Does everybody have their Ambien handy for tonight, or your glass of wine or whiskey? It actually is very frightening. And I would say maybe 10 years ago, if you and I had talked like that, people would say, "Oh, like what a bunch of nuts they are! Like listen to them; they're so paranoid." But it's not paranoia. It's actually a legitimate scenario. The whole EMP scenario, as you mentioned, it's huge and it's long lasting.
It is exactly that. Folks, we have been talking to Susan Katz Keating, SKK, and I have absolutely, without a doubt, enjoyed the time. The time has gone like, boom, quick, done. Again, in retrospect now, can you tell folks where can you be found and maybe a little bit about what you might be anticipating doing in the future to include writing your book?
LinkedIn, Susan Katz Keating LinkedIn, and I'm sorry I forget the link. I have a Facebook fan page, and of course I'm on Twitter, all under the Susan Katz Keating name. And then you can see like what I've done for American Media Institute, for U.S. News and World Report, in my various clients, People Magazine and others. And then, right now I'm writing is so solitary. My big issue right now. Like my shoulders get cramped from writing all day. And I will be, continuing that and doing the Soldier of Fortune memoir. And then I'm going to be writing about Operation Hobo, my journey through itinerant nomadism.
Yeah, you're sort of the 21st century Bedouin with a go bag.
Oh, I like that. I like that.
Steal away.
Oh, thank you. This is awesome.
So, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, we have been talking to Susan Katz Keating. It has been an honor and a pleasure. I'd love to have you back anytime. I'm sure that, the doors are always open to you here in the Saloon. It's been a wonderful time, and I am definitely going to get you back, if I may, with your permission.
Oh, I would love to come back. You know what? You're right. The time has flown by. I had no idea it would go by this quickly, and this has been really fun. You're, as always, a wonderful conversationalist, a raconteur, and a keen observer of world events. So I would love to come back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I love that word, raconteur. I like that a lot. Folks, that's been Susan Katz Keating, here, live and direct on the Bloviating Zeppelins, Berserk, Bobcat, Saloon.